All right. What are you talking about? My thing's going in and out. Can you just say something real fast? Let me make sure I can hear you guys.
Test.
Excellent. That's a good test. Thank you for that. Okay, cool. Well, this one has been a long time coming as far as what's going on with dentistry, what has changed over the past 20 years, and what is this whole private equity thing and why is it involved in it. So, by the way, if you guys are ever on the Big Island of Hawaii, that's where I was last week, 100% recommend going to do the Volcanoes National Park. It's incredible. Like, the views are literally just the most beautiful thing ever. So I had to put that picture in there. Though when I was in dental school, we would have these early morning like pop quizzes, and they would always have, it was on the screen in our sim lab, and they would always be like, and here's where we were in Thailand and Tahiti. And I was like, I hate that they're doing this. And now it's my privilege to do that to all of you guys. So one day when you're a big, bad endodontist and teaching as well, you could do the same thing to your residents. So it's real fun. Big disclaimer here. This is not legal financial professional advice. It is just me. This does not reason that I'm still going to decide if I'm putting this on the internet or not. Right now I am recording it, but it may just stay within us if the lawyer I show it to says not. So this is not affiliated with SLU. If I do decide to put it on there, make sure you talk to professionals. I'll talk to you about who the professionals are that you need. And there's any actions you guys take off of this is not based on me. That's what my lawyer told me I had to put in here. So how many of you guys know what private equity is? I mean, we've heard about it, it's in the news, but this is kind of the question is, what the hell is this private equity thing and why do we all of a sudden see them involved in dentistry? So a little bit of business school 101. The stock market works as such. If you want to go in and say, buy a little piece of a company, that's what the stock market allows you to do. So for example, if you want to buy one share of Apple, you can call up your broker or go on Robinhood, or there's a bunch of different ways to do it. And you pay $252. I did check it this morning. It was down to $244. So if I had bought this in December when I was making this presentation, I would have lost $6. That's how the stock market works. And you would own a very tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of Apple, as their market cap is $3.8 trillion. Nice and small there. But you would technically own 0.0000001% of Apple. Now, if you want to buy, say, a share of my office, there's no way for you to do that. And by the way, when you do set up an office as an owner, you do have to put in shares. The minimum is 10, I think, because I own all 10 shares of Northern Nevada Endodontics. So there's your fun fact. So I do own shares in this, but it's just me. Now, this is where private equity can come in, is it allows, it's usually big investors, so things like pension funds, retirement funds, those are usually the ones who invest in with private equity groups, and they are then able to buy into products that aren't normally available to the general public. Some of these examples over the years have been these four: Sears, Toys R Us, 99-cent Store, Red Lobster. There's a reason I chose all those. We'll go into that in a second. But some of these were not publicly listed at the time. And because of private equity, investors were able to get inside there. So that's kind of the key idea of it. Now, a lot of this has come from this book, Plunder, which if you're interested in it, I highly recommend reading. It's where I did a lot of the research for this and then a bunch of stuff online as well. And what it kind of helps you do is look at, how many of you heard about Red Lobster and how it was their endless shrimp thing that drove it to bankruptcy? Do you guys remember hearing about this? Yes, cool. And what it allows you to do is start to look at a headline like this and think, well, what else is going on? Because what happened is Red Lobster used to be part of another big conglomerate, and it was sold off to a private equity firm. And even though, yes, they did lose $11 million on the shrimp thing, there's a technique which is effectively called asset stripping, where they sold all of the land and the restaurants for $1.5 billion and then saddled the restaurants with that debt. Allegedly, according to NBC News. I'm going to say allegedly a lot during this presentation, just a heads up. So it lets you kind of start to realize, okay, maybe there's something else going on. Another example here, everyone remembers the fires in California last month. One of the common refrains was that even though crime was going down and the fire risk was going up, they budgeted more money for the police and less money for the fire. That is true, and that is a problem. But what also happened is a bunch of firms bought all the companies that make fire trucks and increased, allegedly, the rate for a new fire truck from $200,000 to $1 million, so they couldn't afford them. But don't worry, we have AI that can make terrible things like this. The Hollywood sign did not burn, by the way, just a heads up. Why do they care about dentistry, though? And when you look at kind of the average rate of return for the S&P 500, you can see it kind of varies. The last few years have been pretty darn good. We had a little bit of a slump in the, that 25-year period, but in general, the rough number you use when calculating out for things like retirement or income is that you'll get a 10% return on your investment. So if you put in $100, a year later, you should have 110. Rough numbers, okay? What I did is I took this information from the Kane Waters group. If you're not familiar with them, they're out of Texas and they work only with dental offices, and they compile every year like an average dentist. And it's a really useful report if you've never looked at it. It is free. You have to put your email in, but they don't really spam you. And the stuff they send is actually kind of useful about tax strategies and things like that. So I would recommend it. And this is the rough numbers for a one doctor GP practice. So you can see you got your rent, your fixed expenses, blah, 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 blah. But the one I want you to see is that net income is 38%. Okay, so you can figure out how much the average one doctor GP would make. 1.3 times 38, anywhere between about $400,000 to $500,000. If any of you worked as a general dentist and said, well, I didn't make that much, this is why you should own a practice. If you're an associate, what you see happen, and this is why a lot of general dentists are starting to bring on associates or have more people in there, is the rent and fixed expenses are going to go down as a total piece of the pie because they're fixed. Supplies, lab cost, and point costs stay about the same, but the amount that you save on that rent and fixed expense can then go into the total profit. So this example here was for a 3-doctor GP practice, about $4 million gross. This just had 47% as the income there. The associates generally are about 27%, but the doctors do make a pretty fair profit off of these numbers. So then the question is, well, what about endo? And we would look at endo. I love that thing's in my way, so I can't actually show you, but it'll move out in just a second. What you'll notice is rent is a little bit smaller because we have smaller offices. Fixed expenses are, well, fixed. They're not too bad. Supplies aren't bad, and employee costs are a lot lower. The profit then is up around 57%. So we do have the highest profit margin of any of the dental practices, mostly because we're pretty small and we can keep things run efficiently. You can do your math here, 1.3 off of about 60%. That's a pretty good income. Now, how do we increase profit? Here's your second Business School 101 lesson. You can either increase the average production per patient, and you can do that by increasing the value that you get from, say, insurance reimbursements, or increasing the amount that you charge, or seeing more patients, or you can lower the cost. So you can save on supplies, save on staff, save on whatever else it may be. Okay, in general, the idea is that you want to address inefficiencies, and we'll be focusing on this a lot over the next few months as we kind of cover these sorts of things. This was just a small little amount of things that I came up with for how dental practices are inefficient. There's a lot. And that is because we don't learn any of this in dental school. We do very, very little business. We have no idea. And we do need to focus on doing the root canals, learning crowns, bridges, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so when you were to sell, and I didn't write this presentation as if you're going to sell your existing practice, because none of you have an existing practice, but many of you will be working with practices that are owned by some sort of private equity, because that's where most of the beginning jobs are. If you want me to go into what would happen if you were to sell, I'm happy to do that, but this I think is going to be much more applicable to all of you. So how they can help is they can help with those inefficiencies. And so a lot of this is we don't schedule patients very well. Not everybody needs that 2-hour time slot. We can figure out using either teaching staff to do it, or they are kind of talking about using AI to look at x-rays. Is there a chance this tooth is cracked? Do we need to put them in more of a consult spot than a treatment spot? They can automate a lot of this. So who sends out those text messages? Is it your staff, or is it the, Weave or whatever system you're using? Workflow and treatment. This is a big one that I care about, as you all know. Streamlining processes and making sure that you're not wasting time, wasting movements. We'll definitely go into that one. Technology and systems is another big one. A lot of older practices are sort of like the house that I just bought, where it was built in 1992 and it was kept up, but nothing was ever updated. And now we need a new roof and new windows and all that fun stuff. And a lot of dental practices are like that too, where they're still using the x-rays from 2005, or they have a microscope that's never been, updated. And this is where they can really help, because they can invest a lot of capital to help update the practice, automate and integrate new systems, especially digital, especially with like EHRs, things like that, with staff staffing, you can often reorganize things so that you don't need to necessarily have as many staff members if there's inefficiencies there. For example, we cross-train everybody. So there's no, like right now, even though we're not seeing patients, all three of my staff members are at the front desk and they're scheduling, confirming patients, verifying insurances, things like that. If I had someone who was solely an assistant and there was nothing to do with setting up rooms or sterile, they would just be chilling there. And then they can help a ton with inventory because they can purchase in bulk. Just kind of how the difference is if you go to Whole Foods and buy a small little thing of flour versus going to Costco and buying 50 pounds of it. Because you're buying in bulk, you can save a lot of money. And what a lot of these companies are able to do is because they have 20, 30, 40 offices underneath them, they get a much better rate for buying things from the big dental supply companies like Shine Patterson, Darby, and things like that. Now, allegedly, there are some limitations to this. The big one is the loss of autonomy. I took the last week off to go to a conference in Hawaii. I had to ask me. I didn't have to ask anybody. I just told them. If you work in an office that has this, you would have to either ask the owner, which is totally understandable, or ask whoever's in charge. Cultural fit's a big one, and we'll talk about that as well, is that sometimes the culture of a single doctor practice is a little bit different than a multiple doctor if there's this pressure for the return on investment because they did just spend a lot of money. Another big thing is there's these standardizations across practices. You all know the kind of some of the more chain, I have to be careful how I say this, the chain companies who all have the same like logo and design, that's standard across I can go to Missouri and if there's certain DSOs that are here, I can pick them out right away because they have the exact same marketing, logos, everything like that. The problem is a practice that is designed for Beverly Hills isn't going to necessarily have the same needs as a practice designed for like Compton, to give you an example, or for the Missouri ones, what's the bougie area out west? Is it Brentwood? That area is very different than East St. Louis, for example. But when you have all these standardizations, it's the same thing. And so you can't kind of make it work. There's often a short-term focus because we'll talk about what their kind of eventual goal is. There tends to be a lot higher turnover of staff because they don't like these things and it's a lot easier for them to leave because there's not non-competes for staff yet. I'm sure they're working on it. Allegedly. That was a joke for anybody watching. A lot of patients don't like this as well. I was at a dinner party, and anytime you tell everybody you're a dentist, they just tell you all their horror stories. And two of the people there were telling me about their general dentists who they used to be owned by a single doctor who sold out. There's two different ones, both single doctors who sold out to DSO firm, and doctor then brought on a bunch of associates. And their complaint was, I never see the same person. I never see the same hygienist. I liked going to see Dr. X, and he's not even here anymore, and it's a different person every single time, and they don't know me. And so a lot of patients will leave and find somebody who still gives them that quality of service. And that's one of the ways that you can set yourself apart in the way that you treat your patients is by that quality of the service and the experience that they have. The other big one is overexpansion. We've seen this, if you guys think about like they overexpanded way too much, and now they're seeing the problems with that. So what happens is that there's generally a fee or some other, this is a rough example. This is not based off of any company, and there's different ways that this happens. But in general, there will be a fee for being kind of owned by the company, and that becomes the fixed expense. So let's say you make $1 million, the private equity might say, all right, it's $200,000 a year, as that's going to be our take. All right. And then they're pretty good about like looking through things like, hey, is your lease agreement up to date? Can we make that better? Let's decrease some of the supply costs. Let's decrease some of the employee costs. And so what you see is that there are decreases in your costs, your supplies, your fixed expense and rent and things like that. And they don't really touch the doctor's salary too much. I think the lowest I've seen is like 35 for endo, but in general, 40 is kind of the lowest end, up to about 50 for an associate staff. And at this point, the doctor then becomes the associate. And you see that the doctor spends less time on administrative things, and that can be nice to not have to do those. For example, I have to do payroll today, which is what I'll be doing after this presentation. Allegedly, things then get worse. And what you see is that we start understaffing or underpaying staff. So I'm going to use examples from my friends who work for different companies in the area, and I've changed some of the things so that they can't get in trouble. And what you see is, for example, I have one friend who they don't have any staff members because they start at $13 an hour for an assistant. McDonald's and Walmart here start at like 17 or 18. And it's really hard to get people to come in and work when it's that low. You start to see lots of understaffing as well. I had another friend in a different area who was doing, she's an endodontist, and her spouse is an orthodontist. The endodontist ended up having to have the spouse come in and assist her because she didn't have any assistants and was doing an apico that day. And well, you can right now do root canals on your own. I think all of us agree you really cannot do an apico without an assistant here. Another big one is that we start to see cutting in supplies. I have a friend who works at a office who does a lot of implants, and generally you need to replace an implant drill about every 10 to 20 implants because they get dull. They haven't had new implant drills in a year and a half, and they do about 10 implants a week. So 600 versus 10. He's a little concerned about what that's doing to the bone, as it's not cutting, it's now shaving in the heat, but it's working. I don't think that's the best thing, but another example where they didn't have the supplies for temporary crowns. And so they tried to do a crown that day and realized they had nothing to make a temporary crown with, and they didn't have CAD/CAM, so they couldn't do the crown that day. That's kind of, yeah. We'll get into that later. Another big one is lack of investment. After they buy the practice, they may get things up to date, but you can sometimes see that we don't have as much continued investment in the long-term health of the practice, allegedly. Another big one is, as we talked about, patients can definitely see that there's a disconnect with how things used to be and how they are now. And a lot of referrals won't send to specialists once they learn that they're associated with a private equity group. We had a big ADA thing here back in January. New dentist came to town, nice dude. He's a specialist that works for one of the local ones. He's by himself, and it's not like it says, you know, like if I were to have a second location, it would probably still be some form of Northern Nevada Endodontics. It doesn't say that on his logo, so no one knew about that. And he had to leave early. A few people were talking, and they're like, oh, we love that guy. He's so great. We need to start sending to him. And somebody then said, oh, he's works with so-and-so. And they literally was like, oh, now I don't really want to send to them anymore. So that's another thing that can happen. Usually what you're going to see is that you have to increase the patient volume in order to kind of offset some of these things. And one of the ways they do that is get you on more insurances, which means you have lower reimbursement. This all should sound very familiar to you. The thing that everybody forgets is that they tend to blame it on the doctor, because that's the one who they see. So you guys will be held responsible for things that aren't really under your control. Ask some of the previous graduates who have been going through this. They talked to me about this. They will tell you about this as well. Okay, what is the goal of all these places? Do you know what the goal is for all of them? It's not necessarily to make profit. It is money, but in a different way. They need a bigger fish. And this is how this whole thing works. They want to bundle up a bunch of practices and then sell it to a larger fish who can then come along and kind of eat them up, and then everybody makes money. This is how a lot of, if you've heard stories of people who sold their practices to DSOs and made millions and millions, this is how they did it. Because I wasn't going to get into this, but we'll do it real fast. We started early, so I have a little extra time. If you sell a practice for, let's say, $5 million, you are only going to get a certain amount of that liquid. And so that might be, let's say, $2 million. So you get a check for $2 million, and then you still have that $3 million that you're owned. Some of that is going to be retention bonuses. So if you keep hitting your production goals, because they want you to keep producing, you can see how they don't just want to be like, all right, here's your money. And you're like, yeah, I'm going to cut back to like just a patient a day. They want you to keep producing, which does make sense. If you hit those production goals, you then get bonuses on top of that. But the big thing they give you is equity in the company. So now once you sell, you might own 100 shares of company X, whatever that may be. Then if company X gets bought out, that's when you make a ton of money. This is similar to like the people who, you know, like there's a story like it's the chef at Google was like employee number 26, and now he's a multi-millionaire because they didn't have a ton of money to pay him, so they gave him stock options. Back before they went public, after the IPO, he was worth, you know, $20 million, $30 million. And so that's kind of how this whole thing works. And I know a few people who did this back in 2011, 2012, and did make like $25 million because they got bought by the bigger fish. The question is there always another big fish? And that's one for more economists. I don't have the answer to that. So what can you do to kind of offset this? you guys, I'll put this up. Obviously, even if it's not online, I'll get you the presentation, but this might be something you want to take a picture of. Once I'm done, I'll let you guys do it. But these are really important things for when you are negotiating. How many of you have started the negotiation process? I know a couple of the, yeah, perfect. Okay, I should have done this earlier. I think I said this to one of you. If there's unclear contract terms, the non-competes is the really, 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 really big one. The ADA worked with the FTC to help get this knocked out. The ban was going to go in effect, so non-competes weren't going to exist. And like 2 days before it started, a judge in Texas knocked that down. Now it's appealing. Who knows where that's going to be? But as of now, non-competes are alive and well. It's very, very important to negotiate on these things. And remember, when you are going into these negotiations, even though it doesn't feel like it, they need you far more than you need them. Okay. My non-compete was such that I wasn't really able to work anywhere in Reno after I left to practice back in 2018. And so I ended up in Sacramento, worked for a great DSO. So there are good ones. I want to put that out there as well. This is not an anti-DSO type lecture. And I told them, hey, I am building a practice. I will be leaving eventually. It took them over a year and a half to find somebody to come in to take my spot. That's how hard it is sometimes to put. And they were giving incentives. They were trying to do things. It's in a good part of California, and they still had problems. So if you've talked to anybody who's trying to find an associate, it's a lot harder than you think. So you do have the ability to negotiate these things. I know of people who have non-competes in major cities that are 50 miles. That takes out the entire city. I have a friend who's a specialist, and they were located central of Reno, and their non-compete was 25 miles, 5 years. That's all of Reno. That's how bad it is. There's an oral facial pain specialist who's now joined our practice, and the reason she's in Sparks is because it's outside her non-compete of the corporate office that she used to work at. So they are real. Make sure you negotiate these things. This is a really, really important thing to do. If you're going to be working and eventually getting equity, talk to me, but we don't have to go through it all right now. But you want to make sure that it's very clearly defined how you would get paid if the company was to get bought out by that larger fish. Same thing with distributions. When would you get the equity? A lot of these will now, if they'll say like, oh, if you stay on for 2-3 years, you can start to have equity in the company. I know that they're trying to keep people around, because it used to be you come out, you kind of use a DSO as a semi-AGD GPR, work for a few years, and then you go off onto your other thing. That's how it was. That's like what most of my class did. And we graduated 2011 from dental school. Now they realize it's really hard to train everybody up, so they want to keep you in there. And so there's a carrot, which is the equity, and then there's the stick, which is the non-competes. Another big one is lack of transparency. What's their goals? What's their timeline? Who's in charge of this whole thing? That's a really big one. If you don't know who's in charge, you don't know who to report to, and then what happens when things go wrong. If they have unrealistic growth expectations. So all of you right now are definitely going to be slower than you will be in a year, but if they expect that you're going to be seeing 8 patients a day, day one, fresh out of residency, it's a little unrealistic. If they say, hey, we're going to help you move from seeing 4 patients a day to, let's say, 6 in a couple of months, and then 8 by the end of next year, that's a lot more reasonable. A big one here. Most general dentists have no idea what we do, have no idea how our practices work, and have no idea how to work with a specialist in the office. I know this because this is what I did when I came out. I was the specialist in an office of 10 general dentists, and we had a lot of growing pains. I can give you guys a lot more, but that one definitely I'm not recording. We can do that in Boston. And so if you're going into a situation like this, please call me, text me. I'm happy to talk to you all about that. If you're going to an office that's primarily owned by general dentists and run by general dentists, they don't know how to use you. This is the same thing goes true for perio, same thing goes true for oral surgery. And so you need to kind of ask, what experience do you have adding specialists on or working with specialists? And if not, make sure you kind of work through a few of those things, because this is a big, big, big one. If you're going into a new area, learn from my mistakes. Another big one is going to be cost cutting. You know, are they telling you, oh, can't use this many files, you got to shrink down, you can't use this system, you can't use this. This you won't really see as much until you get inside there, but you can talk to the people who may have worked with that. Same thing with staff. How many employees do you have? This was another big one for one of my friends, general dentist, and they only gave her 1 assistant the entire time, even though she was trying to run like 3 or 4 columns. You can't do that with just a single assistant. So that's a big thing. Are they going to buy you a microscope? Do they have a cone beam? Are they going to buy you a cone beam? These are things that you really need to look through. Another big one is the cultural mismatch, and we talked about this. Legally, the vision and mission of a corporation, this has been handed down by, I believe, the Supreme Court, if not a lower level, is to return value to shareholders. That is called their fiduciary duty. If they don't return said value to shareholders, they can actually be fired and they can be fined because they didn't create as much value as possible for their shareholders. I don't know anyone who went into dentistry just for profit. And if you did, you made a mistake because there's much, 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 much better ways to make money than to be a dentist. I think all of us went into dentistry because we had that desire to help patients and help make them feel better, get them out of pain, give them a smile, function, whatever it may be for you. I know that's pretty much what all of the people I've talked to. So that can be a big problem, is when there's this mismatch. And I think that's where a lot of the issues come through. The office I worked at in Sacramento was amazing because it was still run by a dentist. He had actually built up a giant group of pediatric dental offices, sold that for a lot of money. Super cool dude. He was doing this for fun because he realized there was a need for it. And so there was never this serious push for profits. It was, let's take care of people. And so that worked very well with me. I hope all of you can find a place like that as well. I think that's the last one. If you guys want to take a picture of this, this would be the first one just for when you're going into it. If you want me to send you the slide, I can do that too. Let me know what you guys are done. I also need some coffee. Excellent. Oh, sorry. Darn it, there's one more. I don't have it. Yeah, I don't have the presenter view on. So the other big one is limited exit. So one thing to remember, I know of very, very few people who are still working at the office that they started fresh out of school. Most of those are family. I bought the practice from my dad, from my mom, whatever it may be. Totally makes sense. You have to think of this like dating. If you had to sign a contract, like a marriage contract, with your high school boyfriend or girlfriend, you'd probably be a little more careful because I don't want that's a long time ago for me. And you'll probably go through, on average, I would say these days, about 5 or 6 different practices before you find the one that actually fits you. That seems to be the average number for most of the people that I've talked to. So come into it knowing that statistically you are very likely to not stay at this practice, and make sure you don't hamstring yourself and can't work in the area after. Okay. Use a lawyer. I don't know how many times I have told people these things. I've told them to use a lawyer and they decide that they know better. And then they get into these situations where they get absolutely destroyed. Never sign a document unless it has been reviewed by a lawyer who has your best interest at heart. And you can show them this. That's why I'm giving you all these things. Say, these are what I'm looking for. You can get one off the TV like Better Call Saul, but if you have one that's versed in contract law, that's ideal. It does not necessarily have to be in dental, but you have to then tell them things like, the non-compete's a super huge deal. I need to make sure that I have adequate staffing, that I have adequate resources, whatever it may be. This is a very big thing. And the reason you want to use a lawyer, no one wants to have a pet shark. But if everyone has a pet shark, make yours the meanest and nastiest one. I shortened it to let them be the asshole for you because you don't want to go in to this relationship fighting with your future employer. You want to pay a lawyer to be the jerk that everybody's mad at. And you just step back and you're like, I'm the sweet ended on that lawyer. Wow, they're being aggressive about that, right? Well, I'll talk to. No, they say that's super important. You guys got to work through that. You don't want to be the one that they're all mad at because starting off on that foot isn't great. Let the lawyer do that for you. That's what they're paid to do. That's why nobody likes lawyers, is because they're paid to be mean. And then you can be safe working in that environment and start off not having that bad negative experience. Does this make sense to everybody? This is super, super, super important. I just spoke to UNLV's dental school, and this was the thing I hammered home. Make sure you do that. Any questions on this? Cool. All of you should be ADA members. If not, I'm going to hunt you down. I am the membership chair for the state of Nevada for another few months. And one of the cool things is the ADA has a free contract review service. Whatever state you are going to, if you talk to say it's Missouri, so talk to the Missouri Dental Association, say, hey, I heard about the contract review service. What do I need to do? You send in the contract. One of the ADA lawyers will review it for you, let you know where there could be some hiccups, and then voila, you got someone who reviewed it. If they say you're all good to go, great. If they say, hey, you may need to get a lawyer to kind of fight for these sorts of things, do it. The nice thing is it's free if you're a member, and it's available in all 50 states. So do this. Thank you, ADA. Okay, This is the other one I wanted you guys to take a picture of. These are the questions to ask even before you do all of this. As I talked about, who has do they have experience managing these practices? Because if they don't, it's a huge mess. Okay, number one, do you actually get the ability to retain clinical autonomy? So I interviewed at one, and one of the existing how much of this can I tell? All right, one of the existing endodontists there was like, it's great. You don't even have to diagnose anymore. You just show up and the tooth's ready to go. And I'm like, I don't think that's a good idea. Like, I have 2 to 3 patients a day that are misdiagnosed, and I work with really, really good general dentists. That sounds terrifying to me, that they're going to be sending me in the wrong cases, and all of a sudden I just do a root canal on a tooth that doesn't need it. I don't like doing that. Another big question there. What are the short-term goals and what are the long-term goals? This is a big one here because a lot of them, they haven't thought about it. We talked about non-competes. I think all of you know non-competes are a really, really, really big issue. If you are coming on, how are you going to introduce the new technologies? How is this going to impact how the staff handle it? Because trust me, if you're coming in and they'd never had an endodontist before, the staff are going to be weird about how things go. For example, there were only a certain amount of x-ray sensors. Most general dentists don't keep x-ray sensors in every room because you don't need it for every procedure. So we kept getting ours taken, like mid-procedure, they'd sneak in and take it while we weren't paying attention. And I was like, we need it for every single procedure, multiple times per procedure. And that's something they don't understand. Once again, a lot of general dentist offices don't understand how specialists work. And then what happens if the private equity firm does sell? What happens to you guys? Can I tell that story? Remind me in Boston to tell you a story about an oral surgeon, because that one I can't tell without giving away too much information. It's a very good story and a very ridiculous story, but that one I'm not doing online. Okay, looking to the future, what's going to happen with all of this? And that's a question that many of you are asking. So this is something private equity came in around 2010, 11. That was about when you started to see them kind of take off. Back in the 90s, early 2000s, none of this really existed. There were some practices that were a little bit bigger, but the real big growth expansion happened during the 2010s. And I was at a conference, and there was this really great speaker who I can't say who it was, but I can say that they knew a lot more about this than a lot of other people. And his line was, I think ortho and pedo will continue to be owned by private equity. But if it were my own money, I wouldn't invest into any endo-specific one. So why is that? Now, looking at the Cain Watters information, they do have it for all the practices in case you're interested. Ortho's at 44%. Pedo's pretty good as well. That's why a lot of people go into pedo. Endo's doing pretty well here. But what I want you to see is look at that staff cost. Much higher for ortho and especially for pedo because some of them have hygienists. The thing to remember is that there's not much our staff can do. They can take x-rays, but once the root canal starts, you can't really delegate much. Whereas if you guys know any ortho assistants, all the orthodontists that are downstairs right now, they're looking very much forward to having a harem of people do all the work for them as they scoot around on their chair. I love orthodontists. I also love making fun of them because that's what they do. But the point is they have large staff because they can delegate things. Same thing with pedo. Pedo is probably one of the most delegated specialties out of any of them because they want to get more kids in because care for children is very difficult. The average dental assistant salary is about 20 to 30, depending on where you are. Hygienists make anywhere from about 40 to 80, and the average DDS salary, calculated based off of the Cain Watters information, varies anywhere from about $200 to $500 an hour. The reason that ortho and pedo are so attractive is you can pay a lot more people a lot less money to do the work and just have a single dentist, whereas with us, you kind of need an endodontist. We are the only ones who really do that work. The other big thing, this is from ADA's Health Policy Institute, we have seen a huge increase in the number of pediatric dentists. We've also seen an almost doubling in the number of orthodontists. Endo, we pretty much stayed not too bad, about 1/3 from 1990. There's a big difference in the supply and demand that's out there, and that's what we're gonna go into real fast. So Econ 101, I do really like econ. I think I would have actually done that if I didn't go into the medical fields because I always find I like math. Simple supply demand curve. On the left-hand axis is going to be the price and the bottom is going to be the quantity of dentistry. So that's how much dentistry can you do. Your demand curve goes down as the amount of dentistry goes up, demand goes down because it's easier to get in, and then here's your supply curve. All right, so this is called your equilibrium. Supply is going to be your number of dentists. Now, the rough number for the supply of number of dentists to the general population for specialists has remained, the rough number is 1 to 30,000. So if you have a population of 300,000, you can probably support 10 endodontists. So that's your rough number when you're looking at where you want to go. That's one of the things we talked about in that previous video. So if there's an oversupply of dentists, what you see is that demand is actually on the low side. So we don't need as many dentists as we actually have. When this happens, there's a downward pressure on the price of dentistry. And so you see this in big cities, Boston, Chicago, San Francisco, LA. Texas used to not have this problem because they were growing so rapidly, but now in the cities, this is becoming an issue in that area. Counter that with the undersupply issue. And so what you see is that there isn't that many dentists who can take care of the treatment, but the demand is really, really high. What that means is there's an upward pressure on the price to go back to that area. Econ 101, pretty easy. And really, it comes to this. If you move to an area where you know you're going to get about $2,000 a root canal, you see guaranteed 8 patients a day, how many of you go work for somebody else? Those numbers right there are enough. You could start a practice all day long. You show that to a bank, they're going to give you all the money in the world. You're good to go. I know this because 2 graduates of the program have done this. So this is Dan Heisrod's practice in Northwest Iowa, and this is Brian Hermanson's practice up in North Dakota. Both of them are in the middle of nowhere. Both of them started a practice from scratch. Both of them are living their best lives. They do extremely well because they're in an area where they're needed. Counter that with, you come out, you have over $500,000 in loans, you just bought a new house, you live in an area that's crowded with endodontists. You only get $800 a root canal because it's so crowded that the insurance market doesn't really have to increase. But do you sign on with this company? We're going to give you both a signing bonus, which will help make you get that down payment on the new house, and they'll get you a daily minimum. Now, you do have to read the fine print here, but if you go to these big areas, it's very difficult to start a practice from scratch, and the other people who know this are the major banks. They're going to look at it and say, no, we're not going to lend you money because it's oversaturated as it is. Lesson I've definitely taught many times before. If you want to make a lot of money and work very few hours, go to an area where you're needed, not where you want to be. You know, we've been talking kind of gloom and doom here for the past, I don't even know how many, 45 minutes? Yeah, I get it, it's down. So what can you do? As an individual, really not too much. So right now, the way that you can kind of help, and this is also why, I don't want to get too into the weeds, but this is why a lot of other things suck right now, is because we're not just paying. All right, we have a little extra time, fine. It used to be that when you paid somebody, most of the money went to them. Now the thing is, chances are there's another person who also wants to get their beak wet. If you ever watch The Sopranos, they're all Uncle Paulie. They all want to get their beak wet. And so it's becoming that things are getting more and more expensive. There's a lot of reasons. Econ's weird. But what you can do is vote with your dollar. So what we see is that if you buy local, about 73% of that dollar stays in the local economy. Whereas if you buy from a similar corporate where the corporate headquarters is not located in that area, less than half of that stays in the economy and the rest goes elsewhere. So this, I can actually say, not allegedly, this is what Charles Fishman said. It's a wonderful book, actually. But the Walmart effect is kind of a well-known study. And what you see is that in general, they make places poorer than they were before they showed up. That's because you have lower earnings, higher unemployment, and you see a 6% yearly decline in average income. They do save 3% from the lower costs that Walmart can bring in because of its economies of scale, but that still is a decline because of the lower wages, and poverty increases by a lot. So how is this happening? And what you see is that a local grocer is probably going to use a local farmer. And if they need an accountant, they're going to have somebody local as well. Whereas if you're a corporate entity, well, they're probably going to get a lot of their stuff from big international suppliers because that's how they can get their economies of scale. I know that they sometimes buy from local farmers. Don't come at me. And they tend to have national support. I dated a gal whose dad was the accountant for Walmart. You know, he lived in California, and most of the money went to Arkansas. Speaking of the money going to Arkansas, they get to buy $300 million mega yachts. And here's the average hourly rates for different Walmarts. The other thing you want to look at is oftentimes it's hard to tell who owns things. I'm sure many of us had been to some of these different restaurants, they're all owned by the same giant private equity. And we see the same thing with restaurants, that they tend to use local suppliers and get local support. Same thing with that. So that's where they're siphoning money away from communities into the other area. Okay, what can you do on a professional level? Get involved. This is me with the current president of the ADA. We have done many cool things to help make things better for dentists. One of the reasons I am trying to talk about this is to spread the word so that people know it is possible to start a practice. I am here to help you. I promise you can do it. Make sure you tell people this as well. Talk to your friends. How many of you knew that the average endodontist, according to Kane Waters, makes around $800,000 a year? You guys aren't going to make that as an associate. I'm telling you that right now. You'd be lucky to make 300, maybe 4 if you really are busting your ass. This is things that people need to know, because the way that we're taught is, how to say this carefully? I'll just tell a story. When I was at UNLV, I gave a presentation showing the benefits of owning a practice, and one of the instructors came up and said, "Thank you so much for doing this." Everybody who comes in here tells them how hard it is to run a practice and how they don't want to do that and how they should just be a dentist. And nobody's coming in giving the other perspective. So tell people about this. Talk to your friends in other residencies. Share this video if they're interested in it. I don't care about the YouTube views. I just want to make sure we get this out to as many people as possible. Because one of my favorite quotes, an educated citizenry is a vital requisite for our survival as a free people. They don't want to tell you that this is the other option out there because everybody would take it if they knew it was. Here's the other problem. This is my pie chart of how much we've spent running. We learn how to run a business in dental school. It's not there. We do love our GV Black though, even though we don't do those preps anymore. And this is what you'll hear. How many of you heard these lines? We'll let you focus on what you went to school for, or you focus on dentistry. We'll handle the rest. I made these up based on all the different things that I've heard over the years, but this is them saying, hey, let us do the administrative stuff. What I want everybody to remember is it takes me generally less than an hour to run my practice per week. And I will very gladly keep that extra 20 to 30% that would be normally going to a firm to do that for me. I can show you how to do all of this. You're not doing this alone. That's the big thing. And so many of you are saying, we've never done this before. How are we going to learn how to do that? How do we learn how to do anything these days, you guys? You either ask the internet or find a video on it, or you guys have access to me and you have access to wonderful, I guarantee Deliberto will tell you all of these things as well. We have a really good group of staff at SLU, and you guys are very lucky to be there because all of us will help you do all these things. Okay, so if we take that big scary thing, I'm going to simplify it down to 8 things. We have issues with the vision, scheduling, lack of communication, inefficiencies in workflow and treatment delivery, issues with non-updated technology, staffing is a big one, how do you manage your inventory, and then what is the patient experience? And so that's what we're going to be going into over the next few weeks, and we'll start with strategic planning next time. But I'm going to go ahead and stop here for now. Come on back. Perfect. Cool. All right. Once again, I know that wasn't about endo, but hopefully that was helpful to you all. Questions, comments, concerns? We have some time, so I can actually go over other stuff as well. Gladly. But send it to the ADA. You need a lawyer to look at it. I can give you a rough idea, but I am not a lawyer. That's not my. I stayed at a Holiday Inn Express, but that's about all that I got for you guys. Like, I've read a few of them. You need someone who went to school to read contracts and can say, hey, here's the big thing you need to be concerned about. But yes, I'm happy. I will gladly read any of your contracts. I'll tell you what my red flags are. But yeah, use where are you? What state are you going to? I brought this up to friends, and they said that how they didn't have a good experience, but you need to help guide. The lawyer doesn't necessarily, the lawyers are looking for just like contract terms that would kind of screw you over. They don't know all the nuances necessarily about dentistry. That's why I put that slide in there, the questions to ask and the things to watch out for, because that'll help give them ideas of what to look for. You know, they may know how to read a contract between like business and a contractor, for example. Like if we had to sign a contract to remodel the office, cool. There's a contract for that. You read through it. They're great at that, but they may not know some of those nuances, and that's where that list should help kind of clarify things for them. But yes, I'll gladly do that for any of you guys. Cool. Other questions? That's a great question. And really, you're going to, I probably should have first asked, did you guys have a chance to watch the videos from the previous years that I sent out? How to start a practice? Yes?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. That's a That's a really good one that will give you a lot of the baseline and talk about kind of the benefits and things like that. And that's more of a like how to, it's more like your recipe. I'm focusing more on the, okay, once you've get into an area, how to fix these things, you're going to have to work as an associate more than likely, unless you do what Dan and Brian did and go to an area that has the demand and doesn't have anybody else there. You know, if you want to be in an area where you're close to a major city, there's probably already another endodontist there. I went over in the first part of those lectures how to choose an area based on the demographics and kind of some tools that you can use for that. The things to watch out for: you want everything to be within a reasonable range and make sure everything's really clearly defined. So the big thing is how you get paid and when you get paid. Sometimes it's bi-monthly with the rest of the staff, and sometimes it's monthly. Doesn't really matter, but keep that in mind that you may be working for a full month before you get that first paycheck. That can be a big thing. Are they daily minimums? How long do they last? And, you know, is there a payback? So the way that mine was set up was for the first few months, I think it was like the first 6 months, I was guaranteed was it 7,000 every pay period. If I produced less than that, that would go into kind of like an amount that I owed, and I would continue making that 7,000 even as my production went up until I paid off that extra amount. And that was actually really nice for me because it allowed me to get like housing, because I can show, hey, I get a guaranteed, you know, I think it was like $200,000 a year, no matter what. So everyone's like, cool, that's great. He can rent a house or rent an apartment. It's good because you can budget really easily with that. All right, I can pay off my loans. So that's a big one. You usually get paid either on collections, which is as the money actually comes in, or you get paid on production, which is as you do the work. Now, this is probably too complicated for a quick answer, but I'll do my best. And if it's not good enough, I'll write it in for the presentation next time to do a little bit better job. In general, you're going to have a lower percentage as the acceptable standard for production than you would for collections, because there's usually write-offs. Sometimes patients don't pay. And so if you are getting paid on collections, you are absorbing some of the risk of the practice. Are they good at collecting money? Are they good at billing insurances? And so if you're getting paid on collections, you need to know, what is your collections rate? Of the production to collections, what's that difference? Because sometimes it can be close to 100% in a very well-run office, and I've seen it down at 70. That's not good. So if you produce $100,000 and you only get paid on 70, well, that's a lot lower number that you're making, and so you should make a higher percentage of that. So that's one thing to consider. For production, they'll often do what's called an adjusted production, meaning we tend to have to write off 3%, whatever it may be. So what they'll do then is say, okay, you get an adjusted production rate of 3% off the total. So once again, you produced 100, you're actually gonna get paid off of 97. That is another way to do it. If that's the case, you need clarity. When is that calculated? How is that calculated? What are you guys doing to make it so that that number is as close as possible to the amount that I produce? Another one that I would recommend adding into your contract, because it's no risk for them at the beginning because you're not going to meet these targets, is to have production goal targets that will then increase your compensation. So this is what I had in Sacramento, where I think it was if I produced, I don't know that, I'll make it up. If you produce less than $2,500, you get paid, let's say, 40%. 25 to 5,000, you get paid 42%, and then 5,000 and up, you get paid 50% on that. The math gets a little wonky, but and kind of how you would average it out also gets a little bit wonky, but I could write this up for you. What that allows you to do is say, hey, I have the incentive to see more patients. You have the incentive to give me more patients. And so you have kind of a win-win of, all right, the more patients I see, the more I can make, because now I'm getting those extra few percentage points plus making more. And for them, the marginal cost of adding an extra patient is much lower because those fixed costs are fixed no matter what you do. The variable costs actually are pretty low. If your practice is run well, they should have a rough idea of what those fixed expenses are that you would need to meet your overhead. Just as a reminder, your overhead is 100% until you meet it. I figured this was going to be a longer answer than just in this Q&A. Those would be some very basic ones to look out for. Obviously, non-compete's a big, huge deal. The other things I talked about, but for an associate contract, those are the rough numbers that you should be expecting. You're going to get probably anywhere from about 40 to 45% for production-based. You're going to get probably 45 to 50 for collection-based. If you supply, oh, that's another one. I guess I should probably talk about that. Big difference between a W-2 and a 1099. So 1099 is an independent contractor, and a lot of people like to classify us as independent contractors because we do work separately. It allows the practice owner to pay a lot less in taxes because you, as the independent contractor, are paying the taxes. It does allow you, though, to access a lot of the tax write-offs you wouldn't normally have the availability to do. That's also another presentation on its own. If you, depending on which one you kind of get set up with, if you're W-2 in a lot of states, they have to provide you health insurance. They have other things they have to include you in. It's a lot more money to have employees than to have contractors. So for example, my payroll this period is probably going to be around $5,000 that the staff will actually get. And I'm going to be paying $6,000 because of additional taxes on top of that, of payments to the accountants, of payments to the payroll provider, and other fees like that. So if they were all independent contractors, I would just pay the $5,000 and they'd have to do the rest of it. They have to figure out the taxes. They have to figure out all those things as well. So that's why they want to keep you as 1099s. But in a lot of states, they're now cracking down on that. And we'll see if IRS gets doged and they don't actually have any power anymore, but they're also getting cracked down on that. So yeah. Okay. Was that enough to at least start? Sorry, I feel like I've been talking forever. Have you been taking notes? Good. That was a lot. What other questions do you have? I know this is the stuff that nobody tells you, so this is what I'm trying to help. I got a few more minutes till my next patient's here. Those are rough standards, and you can tweak it. I mean, there's different ways, but those would be the rough numbers. 40 to 45 is pretty standard for production. 45 to 50 is pretty standard for collection. If they add in health insurance, stuff like that. Do they give you CE? There's some perks that you can kind of move it up and down a little bit. But the one thing that not a lot of people do is that tiered system. And if you explain it to them, but by the way, most practice owners don't know this stuff either. The fact that I said marginal cost will go right over the head of the 90% of people, but that's a term in economics. They don't get this either. So you may actually have to explain this to them. I have had to explain this to practice owners before, how it would work. So don't hesitate to do that. Next time, we're going to go into kind of strategic planning, how to get this whole thing started. I'm going to have it geared towards where you all are right now, how to set your guys up for the best chance of success, knowing that you're probably not going to be able to start a practice for the first couple of years, but eventually you can. And then after that, I think what we'll do is tag team clinical with this. So we'll kind of go back and forth. So it's not just all business stuff because it can get a little drony-on-y. I try to keep it as light and fun as possible, but I know there's been a few, we're gonna talk about ledges. We still haven't even talked about MB2s, you guys. Like there's more things we got to talk about. So we'll cover some of the clinical stuff, but this was really important to me that you guys get this baseline. It's what I wish I had known. I did have the benefit of my mom's an accountant. So that was where I got a lot of this from. Any other questions? Cool. I'm always available via text, guys. Do you guys have a patient, hopefully? We'll see. Yeah, everybody's been slow. My January was down like 15% over last year. This month's I was off for a week, so it's a little hard to tell. But it's been things are weird right now, so don't be surprised if it's a little slow. So you'll get there, I promise. Cool. All right, guys. I'll talk to y'all soon.